Hundreds of Bolivians are camping outside the Bolivian consulate in Santiago, Chile, waiting to be allowed to return to their country. El Salvador begins sealing off jail cells housing gang members in an effort to prevent violence in prisons. And former Ivory Coats Prime Minister Minister Soro has been sentenced to 20 years in jail. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south. Hundreds of Bolivians are camping in front of the Bolivian consulate in the Chilean capital, Santiago, without water, bathrooms, or coronavirus screening. Some 400 Bolivians, including children and pregnant women, are crammed between blankets set up as tents in the cold of the Chilean autumn amid fears of the virus and their future. The Chilean government is reported working with Bolivian authorities that the group, once they complete a mandatory quarantine, will be allowed to return to their country. Chile and Bolivia have no diplomatic relations and have kept their borders closed since March.
Why can't I return? Because the borders are closed due to the coronavirus, and we are asking authorities to give us a solution. If we have to be in quarantine, we are going to do it, but we need shelter because there are pregnant women and children in streets.
El Salvador has begun sealing off jail cells housing gang members in an effort to prevent violence in prisons. The drastic measure is in response to an increase in murders in El Salvador's prisons and aims to limit communication between gang members who could potentially stage attacks on rival inmates. The Minister of Justice also announced that members of various gangs will now share the same cell, ending a separation policy which was put in place in 2002 to avoid fights between rival gangs. The Human Rights Commission of El Salvador condemned this decision, saying this will lead to selective or collective mutiny or murder. Gangs in El Salvador have some 70,000 members, with more than 17,000 of them incarcerated.
No ray of sunlight will enter the cells. We're going to block all lines of sight so that they cannot have any type of communication. This measure is totally indefinite in terms of time. Not a cell, not a single cell will have lines of sight. They will be closed. Sealed is the word. Completely, they will not have a view from one corridor to the other, or between one cell and another. We do not need to ask any judge to validate these actions. These actions are already legal.
Moving on, Argentinian health workers have protested outside several hospitals in Buenos Aires, demanding high-quality protective gear for all and more resources to combat the coronavirus crisis. According to the State Workers Association, over 500 health workers have been infected with the coronavirus throughout the country, of which almost 30% are in the city of Buenos Aires. President Alberto Fernández announced last Saturday that the quarantine in Argentina would be extended until May 10th. Argentina has registered 4,003 infections and 197 deaths linked to the coronavirus.
We've just gone 3 days without alcohol for disinfection. Today a very small quantity arrived and it's not enough. The same happens with the face masks and for the N95, which is the right one to have. They give one per person and only to those who are in direct contact with COVID-19 patients, no one else. So what we say is that the bureaucratic mechanism must be streamlined so that everyone can have an N95 face mask in case of an emergency. Because if I have a patient with COVID-19 and I don't have it, I cannot go and look for who knows where the protective equipment is.
The government of Argentina has announced an extension to the nationwide quarantine until May 10th. As part of this extension, they also announced new stages of the quarantine to prevent a further rise in infections.
Argentina has started a 4th stage of the quarantine as ordered by President Alberto Fernández.
We have made great strides and have managed to achieve some of the goals we initially set for ourselves. But this does not mean we have solved the issue. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, although we must be grateful that it has not hit Argentina as hard as other places.
The president spoke about the ongoing strategy to slow down the spread of COVID-19.
If we're talking about an urban conglomerate with more than 500,000 residents, then quarantine measures will remain as they are.
Experts agree that health and economic measures taken by the government are correct, though some say more resources should be allocated to the health sector.
The government is taking care of the economically active population and a large part of the business sector, and public works will be what pushes the economy forward.
Understanding and acceptance by the population of these measures has been key in flattening the infection curve.
This country has a government that stands before the people, that makes proposals and is working for everyone's benefit. We can see they are working all the time, but there is always an opposition from the financial sector that fears no pandemics and think they can survive.
A situation that allows the government to plan ahead about how to confront the economic crisis that was worsened by the pandemic.
The government is aware of what the social situation in Argentina is. They are implementing economic assistance programs. The pandemic has not diminished their original plans or ideas, which will allow us to fix our country.
And while May 10th is the anticipated date for the end of the quarantine, authorities have warned the date could be pushed back further.
In the city of Guayaquil, the epicenter of the coronavirus epidemic in Ecuador, frontline young doctors and nurses are living separated from their relatives in hotels. Health workers in the coastal city of Guayaquil have decided to stay in hotels that municipality made available for them during the pandemic in order to avoid putting their families at risk. Ecuador is one of the worst affected countries in the region. Even though health workers are now in high demand, many young doctors and nurses fear they won't be able to keep their jobs once the epidemic has passed. According to official statistics, there are more than 23,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases in the country, with more than 600 deaths and 1,138 COVID-related deaths, although many fear real numbers could be much higher.
We are leaving each one of us in his room with the restrictions, obviously, of avoiding contact with the people outside. We don't receive visitors and we are isolating ourselves. Food comes to us. From here we take the food up to our room and practically live there. It's a way to protect ourselves, to prevent our family members from getting infected, because many of our colleagues and friends have family members who are at high risk.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Anguilla is now the second Caribbean country to declare the 100% recovery of all COVID-19 patients. On Sunday, the island noted that there were 0 active cases after all 3 people who contracted the virus fully recovered. In an update on Monday, the governor and premier said the borders will remain closed until at least the end of May, while all restrictions on movement and gatherings will be maintained. Last week, St. Lucia became the first country to announce the 100% recovery of all of its 15 coronavirus cases. Trinidad and Tobago has announced that 4,000 test kits destined to reach the country were blocked by the United States, restricting the nation's ability to set up a lab to test citizens for COVID-19.
The kickback was that there was a trade embargo. We could not get the test kits out of the United States because there was an embargo. I am happy to report that we will be receiving 4,000 test kits that will go to Southwest, but I can't give you a firm time. The embargo on that particular company has been partially lifted. I spoke to the agent 2 days ago, and as soon as we get those 4,000 test kits, they will be dedicated to Southwest. And then we also want to give Tobago their own capacity to do point-of-care testing.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has named André Mendonça as the new justice minister, replacing Sergio Moro, who resigned last Friday. The 47-year-old Mendonça previously served as Brazil's attorney general and was once considered for a nomination to the Brazilian Supreme Court. He is credited with recovering some $1.33 billion from companies accused of corruption by means of leniency deals. Meanwhile, Alexandre Ramagem, the former head of the Brazilian intelligence agency, was named federal police chief, replacing Mauricio Valeixo, whose dismissal last Friday had prompted Moro's resignation. A Brazilian Supreme Court judge has ordered a probe into accusations by former Justice and Security Minister Sergio Moro that President Jair Bolsonaro sought to interfere with police investigations. Our correspondent Brian Muir from Sao Paulo has the details.
Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Celso de Mello opened up an inquiry into 8 crimes committed by far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. These crimes are based on events that took place last week when Bolsonaro's super justice minister, Sergio Moro, gave his resignation speech. He produced social media conversation records of a WhatsApp conversation in which President Bolsonaro said he wanted to replace the federal police director because he wanted somebody who he had better personal relationships with. Now, this is understood to be related to the fact that the federal police are investigating 2 of Jair Bolsonaro's sons right now. Carlos for operating a fake news empire which spread lies about presidential candidate Fernando Haddad during the 2018 elections. And the second is involving Bolsonaro's son Flavio for involvement with money laundering involving Rio de Janeiro organized crime militias. Bolsonaro apparently expressed support for the idea that they could put in a federal police director who would be more sympathetic to him personally and help cover the charges against his children. So this is a big deal. Last night when it was announced, people were cheering on the streets, even in my working class neighborhood on the northwest side of Sao Paulo. However, it's important to note that it's not an investigation. Congress has authorized an inquiry. After 60 days, once the federal police produces its report for the Supreme Court, they will have the power to submit an impeachment request. But there's already 29 impeachment requests being held in Congress against Bolsonaro for other crimes he's committed. The real issue here is that it's political. It increases the political pressure. And a new poll by Atlas Group shows that for the first time since Bolsonaro took office, the majority of the Brazilian people now support his impeachment.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc in most nations, medical experts from Cuba have been deployed across the globe to help combat the virus. In the Italian city of Crema, a team of Cuban doctors has been helping their Italian counterparts overcome some of the worst the pandemic has had to offer.
Just like they did in many countries in Africa during the Ebola pandemic, Cuban doctors today bring a sense of hope and solidarity to those affected by COVID-19 across the globe. In Italy, one of the worst hit countries by the pandemic, a Cuban medical mission is now doing the same.
I see them as heroes. They are on the front lines against the virus. They are helping anyone who needs help. This show of solidarity and unity is very important.
Many patients express gratitude for the treatment they have received from the Cuban doctors.
I found many angels who made me feel at home. These are people full of love who work with their hearts. They are not just doctors or nurses, they are worthy angels. Thank you for everything. We will always hold you close to our hearts.
Workdays in this hospital are intense, and all precautions are taken in the red zone.
If you are dedicated about your work, if you truly understand what it represents to you, to the people you help, and to your homeland, then fear can be controlled.
Ebola taught us how to use protective equipment, how to care for ourselves. It was a dangerous disease, just like this one, and it's testing us. We need to be very careful to avoid infection.
These health professionals have many stories to tell on their return to Cuba, but they will surely bring back the gratitude of an entire nation.
I want to send the world a message of hope to my family, my parents, and especially my wife and my child. Please don't worry about us. We are all okay. We stand united. We are a family and we will soon come home.
I want to send a message to Raúl Castro, with whom I made a special deal since he asked me to write about my experience fighting Ebola. So now back on the battlefield, and just like we said back when we left for Africa, yes sir, Commander.
A la orden, comandante, a la orden, mi general.
Ya estamos listos. Los pacientes nos esperan.
Somos la misma humanidad. Todos frente al mismo acertijo.
An Ivory Coast guard has sentenced former Prime Minister Guillaume Soro to 20 years in prison on charges of embezzlement and money laundering. Soro was accused of buying a house in Abidjan in 2007 with public money. The Abidjan court on Tuesday fined him nearly 7 million euros, ordered the confiscation of his Abidjan home, and barred him from civic duties for 5 years. Soro, a former rebel leader and a candidate in presidential elections this October, currently lives in exile in France. The United States has admitted to killing 2 civilians and injuring 3 in an airstrike in Somalia early last year. U.S. Army General Stephen Townsend made the rare acknowledgement in a debut quarterly assessment report by AFRICOM on military operations in the country. The deaths were mentioned on allegations of civilian casualties raised in connection with its operations against Islamist militants in Somalia, Libya, and other African nations. In Mali, a fire has destroyed much of the main camp for people that are displaced in Bamako, housing more than 1,000 refugees. No report on casualties was immediately available, but the Falide camp, made up of makeshift huts installed on a landfill in the south of the Malian capital, was reduced to ashes. According to humanitarian workers, the camp houses more than 1,000 people and most members of the Fulani ethnic group from central Mali who were chased out of their homes by a cycle of jihadist and inter-community violence. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The Pan American Health Organization has declared a 60% reduction in its finances due to the freeze of U.S. payments to the World Health Organization, announced earlier in April.
So we have learned that the freeze has been extended to include PAHO. Over the years, we have enjoyed very firm collaboration and technical support from the U.S. government. They have supported us in health policy development, in the definition and implementation of programs. 60% of the funding of PAHO comes from the U.S. government. And that tells you and speaks volume. The funding from the United States has been really central to the work of the Pan American Health Organization. And I must say that some of the programs that I listed have a direct impact on the national health security of our countries, but also on the United States of America. This mutual collaboration between the US and PAHO has stood the test of many, many years. And it is our hope that we can continue to work in this vein to ensure that health and well-being come to the majority of people in the Americas. Thank you.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has extended the nationwide lockdown measures aimed at halting the spread of the new coronavirus until mid-May. President Putin had earlier ordered most businesses except essential industries shut down until the 30th of April.
Including all holidays in May, the period of non-working days is extended until the 11th of May. I draw your attention that all preventive measures adopted in regions should be strictly respected.
The Greek government has announced a gradual easing of coronavirus lockdown rules from May 4th, but says implementation would be monitored on a daily basis. Around 10% of the businesses that were closed last month will be allowed to reopen, including bookshops, electric goods stores, vehicle testing centers, and hair salons as well. Greece has so far recorded 136 deaths, with 43 people still in intensive care.
Today we can safely say the measures we took paid off. The data cannot be disputed. For days now, new coronavirus cases have been kept to a minimum. More importantly, there is a steady decline in patients with coronavirus in hospitals. As we have contained the first wave of the virus, we are now ready to move on to the second phase of our plan, the gradual de-escalation of lockdown measures, as we are now more prepared than we were 3 months ago. We can carry out more tests, therefore can quickly identify possible new outbreaks of the virus.
France has unveiled a series of measures it will implement starting from May 11th as part of the gradual lift of a 6-week lockdown. Schools will be reopened gradually, bars and restaurants remain shut, while companies are encouraged to allow employees to work from home at least for 3 weeks following May 11th. The government also promised to carry out at least 700,000 tests per week following the country's reopening.
We are proposing a very gradual reopening of nurseries and primary schools throughout France on a voluntary basis from May 11 in a second phase, starting on May 18, in the departments where the spread of the virus is considerably low. We will consider opening middle schools, starting with the 6th and the 5th forms. We will make a decision on reopening high schools at the end of May, starting with vocational high schools at the beginning of June.
Si nous pouvons réouvrir les lycées, les médiathèques, les bibliothèques,
media libraries and small museums, so important for the cultural life of our territories, will be able to reopen their doors from May 11th. On the other hand, the large museums, which attract a large number of visitors from outside their catchment area, cinemas, theaters and concert halls, where people stay in the same place in a closed environment, will not be able to reopen. Festival halls and multi-purpose halls will also remain closed until June 2nd.
Hundreds of Lebanese people have taken part in the funeral of a young man who was killed in riot overnight in the northern city of Tripoli. The clashes had been triggered by the crash of Lebanon's national currency that sent food prices soaring. Over the weekend, the Lebanese pound hit a record low with 4,000 pounds to the dollar on the black market, while the official price remains at 1,507 pounds. Protests also erupted elsewhere in Lebanon, leaving scores injured and more than a dozen people detained. New Zealanders slowly return to work and reopen their businesses as the country's 5-week lockdown has now been eased. Retail businesses can open provided transactions do not involve physical contact, while gatherings of up to 10 people are allowed for events such as weddings or funerals. Schools will also reopen from Wednesday, but authorities expect extremely low attendances. Kiwis are also allowed to fish, hunt, surf, swim, and play golf. The government predicts 400,000 people in the nation of 5 million will return to work under the more relaxed regime.
I think Jacinda Ardern is a really good leader. She's managed to get the whole nation behind her. I think we've all done it together, as she likes to say.
I hope it's the beginning of the end, but I think we need to be very watchful and vigilant over the next 2 weeks to ensure that we don't go back to level 4 or there isn't suddenly a spike of cases, which means we need to stop and do it all again.
The pandemic has forced millions of people to stay at home. Cuban singer Omar Portuondo is encouraging people to listen to music to cope with the situation. Famous Cuban singer Omar Portuondo of the Buena Vista Social Club has also been forced to stay home and take refuge in music. But she says that when everything is over, she hopes to tour the world with a new album. In the meantime, she's telling people to listen to music, which could help them cope with loneliness, fear, and depression during these difficult times.
Como te quiero yo a ti, es imposible mi cielo tan separado vivir.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Ebravo Telesur. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.